The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had the tears. Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of her cramped Brooklyn apartment, watching the storm blur the city lights into watercolor streaks, wondering if anyone would even notice if she disappeared. The eviction notice on her kitchen counter had given her 30 days, but the cancer diagnosis had given her mother less than 6 months. Between mounting medical bills and her own minimum wage paycheck from the diner, Sarah had already sold everything worth selling. All she had left was the choice between keeping a roof over their heads or keeping her mother comfortable. In her final days, it was the kind of choice that hollows you out from the inside, leaving nothing but the sharp edges of impossible decisions. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, feeling the weight of every mistake, every missed opportunity, every door that had slammed shut in her 28 years. The city below moved on, indifferent to her crisis. A million lives intersecting without ever truly touching. Tomorrow, she'd have to tell her mother they might need to move to a shelter. Tomorrow, she'd have to watch the light dim a little more in those eyes that had once promised her the world was full of possibility. But tonight, there was a knock at the door. Sarah hadn't ordered anything, hadn't invited anyone. The few friends she'd once had drifted away when her life became an endless cycle of work, hospital visits, and worry. She wiped her eyes and opened the door to find a woman she'd never seen before, probably in her 60s, wearing a rain-soaked coat and holding a large envelope. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked, her voice gentle but certain. "Yes? I'm Margaret Chen. I was your mother's nurse, about 20 years ago when she had you. She probably doesn't remember me. But I've never forgotten her." Margaret's eyes glistened with something beyond the rain. "May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside, confused and cautious. Margaret walked directly to the kitchen table, set down the envelope, and pulled out a chair as if she'd been there 100 times before. "I know about the eviction. I know about the diagnosis. And I know you've been trying to do this alone." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "How do you—" "Because 28 years ago, I was exactly where you are now." Margaret removed her coat, revealing a simple cardigan and the kind of steady calm that comes from surviving storms. "Single mother, dying parent, bills I couldn't pay. The night I decided to end it all, your mother saved my life." Sarah sank into the chair across from her, the story pulling her forward like gravity. "I was her patient in the psychiatric ward," Margaret continued, her hands folded on the table. "I'd attempted suicide. Failed, obviously. Ended up on her floor, and she was assigned to me. She wasn't supposed to do what she did. Nurses aren't supposed to get involved beyond their shift. But your mother, she saw something in me." She came back on her days off. She brought her own food because she knew the hospital meals were terrible. She sat with me for hours, not as a nurse, but as a human being who refused to let me give up. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, picturing her mother young and strong, capable of saving lives instead of fighting for her own. One night I told her I had no reason to keep fighting. Do you know what she said? Margaret smiled through her own tears. She said, "You don't need a reason right now. You just need tomorrow, and I'll make sure you get there." Then she did something I've never forgotten. She gave me an envelope just like this one, and told me to open it when I was ready to live again. Margaret pushed the envelope across the table. Sarah stared at it, her hands trembling. Inside was $3,000. Every penny she'd saved for a down payment on a house. She gave it to me, a stranger, because she believed I was worth saving. She made me promise that when I could, I'd pass it forward to someone who needed it as desperately as I had. She said that's how we build the world we want to live in, one act of crazy, reckless kindness at a time. Sarah couldn't breathe. $3,000. Her mother had given away $3,000 to a stranger, which explained why they'd always lived in apartments, why there'd never been enough, why her mother had worked double shifts for years. Not because she was bad with money, but because she'd chosen someone else's life over her own comfort. "I did get better," Margaret said softly. "I got help. I rebuilt. I became a social worker, then a therapist. I've spent the last 25 years helping people in crisis. I've saved money, invested wisely, and I've been waiting for the right moment to honor my promise to your mother." Margaret reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "The envelope doesn't have $3,000 in it. It has $30,000. Because that's what her gift grew into in my life. Exponentially. beautifully beyond measure, and it's yours now, not as charity, but as your birthright. Your mother invested in humanity, and this is the return." Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a cashier's check made out to her, along with a handwritten letter in her mother's young, hopeful handwriting. The letter was dated 28 years ago, just after Sarah was born. "To whoever receives this gift," it read, "I'm betting everything I have on the belief that people are fundamentally good, that kindness compounds like interest, and that the world is held together by millions of small decisions to choose each other over ourselves. If you're reading this, you're in pain. I remember pain. I remember thinking I couldn't carry one more thing. But you can, not alone, but with help. Take this help, use it, heal, then find someone else who needs to know they're not alone. That's how we all make it through, together." Sarah sobbed, the kind of crying that empties you out and fills you up simultaneously. Margaret moved around the table and held her. This stranger who wasn't a stranger, this woman who was living proof that her mother's faith in humanity hadn't been naive or foolish, but prophetic. "There's more," Margaret said when Sarah could breathe again. "I've contacted a palliative care network. I've arranged for your mother to receive in-home hospice care at no cost to you. I've also reached out to 3 other women I've helped over the years who are now in a position to give back. We want to create a support system for you both. Meals, companionship, respite care. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Over the next 5 months, Sarah learned what it meant to be held by a community. Margaret came twice a week, bringing soup and stories. A woman named Keisha, who Margaret had counseled through her own mother's death, came to sit with Sarah's mother so Sarah could sleep. A lawyer named Jennifer, pro bono, helped Sarah navigate medical bills and found financial assistance programs Sarah never knew existed. A hospice nurse named Tom treated Sarah's mother with such tenderness that death, when it came, felt less like an ending and more like a gentle transition. Sarah's mother died on a Tuesday morning in May, with sunshine streaming through the windows and her daughter holding her hand. Her last words were, "I knew you'd be okay. I knew the world would catch you." The funeral was standing room only, filled with people Sarah had never met, people Margaret had helped, people those people had helped, an intricate web of kindness that stretched back nearly 3 decades to one nurse's crazy decision to give away her house fund. After everyone left, Margaret pulled Sarah aside. "Your mother made me promise one more thing. She made me promise that I'd ask you to keep the chain going. Not right away. Grief takes time. But when you're ready, when you're stable, she wanted you to find someone who needs to know they matter. She wanted you to be the miracle in someone else's impossible moment." Sarah looked at the check still folded in her pocket, the money that had paid her rent, her mother's final medical bills, and left her with a cushion for the first time in her life. She thought about the apartment she could finally afford to keep, the stability she'd never known, the future that had seemed impossible 3 days before a knock on her door. "I don't know if I can do what she did," Sarah whispered. "I'm not that strong." Margaret smiled. The same smile she'd probably given Sarah's mother all those years ago. "Your mother wasn't strong when she gave me that envelope. She was terrified. She was broke. She was doing the scariest thing she'd ever done. But she did it anyway, not because she was strong, but because she believed that love, real, concrete, sacrificial love, is the only thing that actually changes the world." 6 months later, Sarah stood outside an emergency room, watching a young man collapse on a bench, his face in his hands. She recognized that posture, the way grief and hopelessness bend you into yourself. She sat down next to him and waited until he looked up. "I don't know your story," she said quietly, "but I know what it feels like to think you're out of options. My name is Sarah, and I'm here to tell you that someone believes you're worth fighting for." She pulled out an envelope the same size as the one Margaret had given her, containing money she'd saved over 6 months of careful living. Inside was also a letter handwritten in her own script, telling the story of her mother, of Margaret, of the unbroken chain of human kindness that had saved her life. "This isn't charity," she told him. "This is your birthright. This is proof that you're not alone. Take it. Use it. Heal. And when you can, find someone else who needs to know they matter." The young man stared at her with disbelief and hope warring in his eyes. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Sarah smiled through her tears, hearing her mother's voice in her own words. Because someone did it for me. Because that's how we all make it through together. Because the world is held together by millions of small decisions to choose each other over ourselves. She stood up, placed the envelope in his hands, and walked away, understanding finally what her mother had known all along, that the opposite of despair isn't happiness, it's connection, that we save ourselves by saving each other, that every act of kindness ripples outward in ways we'll never fully comprehend, touching lives we'll never meet, building a world where no one has to face their darkest moments alone. The rain had stopped. The city lights blazed clear and bright. And somewhere in Brooklyn, in every corner of the world, someone was making the choice to be someone else's miracle, keeping alive the faith that humanity, at its core, is worth believing in.